Hello and welcome to my Bevy migration guide 0.10 to 0.11. In this video I'm going to be going through the migration guide, and if you're watching the live stream VOD you'll be able to go through and continue to watch me to upgrade my actual game, but the migration video is going to come first. So what's new is the new and improved ad systems. So I haven't actually read through this document first, I only read through the actual update thing. So what it's talking about here is that they decided it was too confusing with how they had it set up in order to add systems to specific schedules. So they've changed the API. So now you can add system, or like originally you added system. Now you add systems to update A. And now you used to add systems A, B in schedule startup. Now you add systems to startup and A and B. This will result in more unified and easy to read code, because you can see much shorter than the corresponding code, and especially when you start ending up with all this weird stuff. So like, for example, you got AB in schedule startup, in base set pre-startup. Now it's just in pre-startup AB. This feels very much like they're going back to 0.9's API. They basically removed all this stuff in 0.10 and went, yeah, no, we've put everything in the same schedule. And now they're like, well, we put it all in the same schedule and people didn't use it right. So they've also talked about, they used to have an add startup system. Now it's just add systems to startup, which is a good way of unifying things. Again, they had a dot on startup. And again, they're just trying to condense things down. Add systems. This is one of the few things where I feel like they've taken a little step backwards, but it's kind of mandatory in order to operate the API. Is used to say add systems, CDE. Now you have to go update CDE. Very small change and incredibly useful for everything except the default case. For example, in fixed update, now it's just fixed update. It's always going to reduce code except in the default condition, which is what I think was causing a lot of problems, is that people were trying to use more advanced features and it was messing them around, so you only really had the option of default. I'm trying to work out where I put my T. On exit, on an enter, also, again, condensing it down, because anything that goes in a schedule goes, specify the schedule and the systems. The only ones that aren't really that is they split base sets into schedules again, which is, again, a step backwards. I liked the it's all one schedule, but I understand why people were getting confused and it was all broken. Render set queue. Okay, so it does the same thing with rendering. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. So it's just called renderer. The render set is now renderer. Okay. So setting configuration also accepts a schedule. So again, you used to say configure set A and say like A is in schedule pre-update and then after B. But now you say, configure set, it's post-update and it's A is after B. So you don't have to specify what schedule the set's in, which, kind of makes sense. It would be nice if what they did is you could configure that A is after B and not have to specify a schedule at all. So you would have all schedules, like all the sets are uniform. So it's like all schedules could have a set A, and set A is just always after set B. But if you've got no systems in set A, then it doesn't have an effect. But this is like you've actually got to physically put the set into the systems that want it. So if you want it in post update and in update, you'll have to add it multiple times. Update is no longer applied by default. That's, I guess, a good change. That's one of the things I talked about, removing a lot of predefined stuff. So all sets defaulted to being an update. Now you have to tell it explicitly it's an update, which, it's all good. I just find it a bit weird that it's like you've got to explicitly state that it's in post update and then A is after B. But I don't know if this will cause panics if A doesn't have a B. Like that, I thought that was the point of putting it all into a single unified system or a unified schedule. But maybe it still does that under the hood. Maybe I'm just missing something. ECS-based redesign. So on the audio, they've moved it from being resource-based, where you needed to take in your Resource audio. Res audio. I don't know where res audio is coming from. That must be the audio player. Yeah, audio play with settings. So yeah, your audio player resource and your audio sync, which was the basically the equivalent of a handle to your audio, but your audio sync would let you like play pause. So the audio resource was seen more like it's like a not a queue, but like your track list, and then your audio sync was the individual track running, and then you had to have a handle to it on your entity in order to control it. Now they've said, fuck it, don't put the audio sync in its own resource. It's just attached directly as a component. So instead of having to query for your handle and the audio sync assets, you just query for the audio sync on the entity. Interesting that you don't need it mutably. You can literally just call toggle. I think that's a bit interesting. But anyway, so add tuples and single plugins to add plugin. Deprecate add plugin. Ooh, I like that. That's something that's always like everything else had a single and a plural like everything's always had a single and a plural version. I like the idea of like it was annoying when you were like add plugin default plugins and it was like no, you can't do that. So now it's just always add plugins. Add plugin still there, but the correct way of doing it, add plugins and specify just a single plugin or a tuple of plugins. So now you can make plugin sets without needing to actually implement plugin group, I guess. Improve shader import model. So this basically works that instead of having to import different segments, you can import like the actual struct itself, vertex output, and you import that like as an object rather than as a this worked as like a like C++'s import, where it's like when you say import this, it literally just copy pastes whatever document you specify, and then runs the compiler. So like it pre-compiles, copying and pasting all the imports, and then compiles. Whereas now I think you actually like import modules, and then the modules are all patched together in a different way. So it works a little bit differently, and means that some things are scoped. They've flattened the UI size down and removed the size. So instead of specifying a size now, you specify a width, height, min width, min height. The only thing I haven't quite worked out about this is I tried doing this and it didn't work. I could not find the width and height parameter, but maybe I was just putting it in the wrong spot. Settings into Scheme Runner plugin. Ooh, okay. Instead of inserting the Scheme Runner Schedule Runner settings resource, configure the Schedule Runner plugin. Okay, so this is just more migration basically from 0.9 to 0.10's stageless. So in that move, they removed a lot of like insert a resource, add the plugin, it'll read the resource, and the resource will stay there forever. Now you're supposed to configure it inside the setting. Inside the plugin, you're supposed to specify the settings. Hence, so this one would be like, oh, run loop duration here, and then you would add the plugin. Now, inside the plugin, you can specify the settings, which is how Bevy is sort of archetyping itself. Settings that are read at compile time or at run should be done in the plugin, not as part of the startup. Add support for custom GLTF vertex attributes. That's nice, but it doesn't tell you how. It's just, you have to change the GLTF plugin to default because now it has internal settings that need to be configured. Delay asset hot reloading. This is configurable now, which is nice. So basically, just when you set your plugin, there's a watch for changes. Instead of just being a true-false boolean, it has a delay. So that's nice because that also means you could, in theory, say watch for changes once a minute if you had like really expensive assets that you expect to change sort of randomly, and you don't want to have to wait and buffer. You could be like only load it when at the end of a level sort of thing. I don't know. Wonder if that would be an interesting thing. Seems like something you could use. Allow systems using diagnostics to run in parallel. Oh, yeah. Please, Bevy, do more. So this is, they've removed the diagnostics from being a resource to being a system parameter, which means that you can literally just say, I want diagnostics. Like you say you want commands and you say you want other things like that, which means that they can run in parallel because you're no longer requesting a mutable reference to the resource, like to the diagnostics object resource. You're no longer requesting mutable access. So they need to do this with the asset server as well. It's not like the asset server because it all is async anyway. Oh, not async. It's async. I don't know. You don't need mutable access to read and write to the asset server. But it would be nice if you could just say, hey, I want the asset server, not, hey, I want resource asset server. Like the asset server to me should be a system parameter, not a resource. And then they've just changed the diagnostics if you want to read them to diagnostics store. So you can, they must be updated at the end of the frame or something, pulled out of the thing. Anyway, log to std error instead of std out. Okay. On Unix systems, we printed logs like info, trace, and error, etc. read from st error instead of st out. Use log on the command line to save. Oh, okay. So, basically tracing related ones. So info, trace, and warn, etc. Now they log to error instead of out. So anything you print line will go to the main output, but anything you call like info, trace, and error to will go to std error, which like I agree with what they've done, except I don't think things like info and trace probably should. But info I feel like should still go to std out just because yeah, I did see that it's changing in 0 to 12. Apparently it's already basically done. It's just a few things they needed to change. But yeah, anyway, back got derailed. The error going to std error is a great idea, and same with trace. But info, I feel like should be something you want to write to the player, or like to just to stand it out. Like info should go to stand it out. But yeah, all the others should be to error sort of thing. But maybe that's just me going like, oh, neat. Like it'd be cool if you could see like this goes to somewhere that can be visible, whereas this goes into a different file because it needs to be handled differently. Anyway, world query metadata type unmanageable. Oh, I don't know. The state and fetch types created using derived world query are now unmanageable. If you need to refer to them, use the syntax state and fetch. Okay, not quite sure what that means. I don't use world queries. I've suggested to people to use world queries when they're complaining about like the complexity of queries. It's like, oh, we'll go look into world queries, but I've yet to reach the point. Probably have reached the point, just never been bothered to look into it. Increased type safety and clarity for change detection. The engine now uses type tick for declaring dealing with change ticks instead of U32. Any code that interfaces with engine including will need to be updated, including manually inputting the traits. Okay, the method world change tick and read. Okay, set. So my guess, I'm just going to click on it because, you know, why not investigate, is if we look at like any code, like any change, they've literally just path component tick. I want to go to this though. Please take me here. Tick. Yeah, it's literally just wrapped the tick. Like it's still a U32. It's just wrapped inside a. I feel like that's a Rust thing that's happening there, like where they've decided that it's safer to wrap it in a type like that. Well, it does say improving type safety and clarity for change detection. It's one of those weird things, like mostly just because Rust Burrow Checker hates it, is that wrapping stuff in this just results in you dereferencing it all the time, which, yeah, not really a problem, except it means that at some point, the compiler needs to work out that all you're doing is using it as a wrapper and dereferencing it all the time, which surely adds to compile time. But anyway, not that big of a difference. It's just, now you know when they're referring to a game tick versus just passing you a U32. Like, they need to clarify that that's what they're doing. Removed change trackers. Change trackers have been removed. Use ref-t queries instead. Okay. Check for conflicting access in is system. This function, the function assert is system and assert is read-only system in Bevy systems. Now panics if past system has invalid work accesses. Okay, any test that calls this function on a system will now fail. Either fix system. Okay, for regular test, this is functionally with test. That is functions annotated with test. Add the should panic attachment. Okay. I don't quite understand the assert is system. I think it's that if you ran a system as a system, even though it wasn't actually a system, in Bevy, like while you're testing, it wouldn't have a problem. But now it's like it will panic. So it's just, I guess it seems like it's for testing purposes. Assert is system. Assert's maybe it could be used for the dynamic loading stuff. But again, like I would think the compiler would catch that they're not systems. I don't quite understand why is system and is read-only system. I guess the read-only system makes a lot of sense because the compiler doesn't know if it's a read-only system. Anyway, it's, again, not somewhere that I really have experience working. Remove base set error variance from schedule. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, they removed base sets, so you can't have base set errors if there's no base sets. It's pretty intuitive, that one. Remove system parameter ignore and world query ignore. The attribute system parameter have been removed. If you are using either of these parameter fields, you can simply remove the attribute. Oh. Right, so system parameter ignore was obviously like it was just saying like there's no way to fetch the phantom data. I'm literally just using it as a marker, so you don't have to specify anymore. I was wondering why. It's like, why would you ignore something? But it's like, if you're deriving a system parameter or a world query, you can just ignore. Okay, anyway. If you are using for another type that implements default, consider wrapping the type in a local. This only work for system parameters. Okay, so it's like, you ignore it. Now it's a local variable, and they're like, okay, that's not the correct way to do it. It should just be a local. Okay. Either trait and need to preserve the exact behavior of the old ignore attribute. Consider manually implementing system parameter for a wrapper struct that uses the default trait. Okay, so world query ignore and default query string, where default query. Oh, okay. So, what they're saying is if you needed it to do something fancy that ignore used to do, you just need to basically wrap it in it like something that then calls default on it rather than because I'm assuming it would call from world. Anyway, so basically you can replicate it, but you'd have to put extra effort in to replicate it. Replace some unsafe system code with safe code. Okay, well, I think I was reading like a pull request about this. It's just like it was, they were using code in Rust's compiler that wasn't stable yet, so it's like they had to do some fancy workaround of unsafe code, but now it's been stabilized, they can use just direct Rust code. Use unsafe world cell to increase code quality for system parameters. For manually implemented system parameters, the function getItem now takes an unsafe world call instead of a world. To access world data using .getEntity will return an unsafe entity cell, which can be used to access component data. GetResource and its variant to access resource data. Okay, so basically they've just turned it into, like, instead of giving it a reference, you give it an unsafe reference. So you as the user have to make sure that you're not doing something stupid with it. and the compiler won't yell at you. So you can do more smart things with it. Update increment change tick to remove a strongly typed tick. What? The function unsafe world cell increment change tick is now strongly typed. Returning a value of type tick instead of raw U32. Okay, it's the same as that thing we talked about earlier. Make state private and only accessible through the getter state resource. Oh, okay. Use state instead of. Okay, I was literally making a video about states, and I was saying, hey, you shouldn't be manipulating the state anyway. Bevy agrees. Bevy's like, no, you don't even get to touch it. You can just get it. You can't even set it. Now, this does break something I was talking about in my video that I think would be a good functionality, but means that it's gone. And that was that you could have continuous data attached to the end of a state. So you could have like raining with an F32 at the end to tell you how intense the rain was. Should have been done with a resource. I was just like, in my video, I was explaining it's something you can do. You can't do that now because it required you to manipulate the state without actually changing states, because, you know, you could increase and decrease the amount of rain without anything changing. Anyway, only trigger state transitions if next state does not equal old state. I don't like this. This is something that, again, been doing a video on states, and I've thought of reasons or situations where you don't want this to be the case. So what it's saying is, if you enter, if you go from state A to state A, it won't trigger the on exit and the on enter. They're no longer queued up and run if the state changes from itself to itself. This I disagree with. This I feel like is, sure, some new people may end up with all this code running because they keep transitioning from the same state to the same state. But to me, there are situations where you would want to transition from one state into itself and run a bunch of code when it exits and a bunch of code when it re-enters, because, like if you leave a scene and go back into if you leave one room and go into another room and it's like, oh, the weather's raining in one room and then the weather's raining in the next room and it resets back to raining, you want the rain to start falling again. You don't want it to just not transition. You want it to start the process again. But that might just be in my head. I'm going there are situations where you would want to transition from itself if the transitions were important. But now you don't even get to transition if you transition from yourself. Anyway, simplified system piping and making it more flexible. Ooh. Into pipe system and into system. Pipe second. Okay. The trait into pipe system has been removed. The pipe method has been moved into the into system trait. Okay. Simplify world schedule method. Okay. Run world schedule ref has been deprecated and will be removed in the next version of Bevy. Use run schedule instead. Interesting. I wonder if this is moving towards my comment about worlds not having not being able to run in parallel, because the run schedule ref, if I remember correctly, removes the scheduler and then runs it via reference rather than running the schedule. But also, all it did was you took in a ref. Well, actually, no, it was the other way. The run schedule took in the non-referenced version and then called run schedule ref with the reference to the version you gave it. So maybe it's just trying to condense and clean that up, because it was literally just doing both. Like this one would just call that one. And now that if they remove that one, they can at least optimize it a bit. Read change text. Now returns a change tick. Oh, okay. It's just, okay, renamed. Improve safety for multi-threaded execution of unsafe world cell. As unsafe world cell read only. System to run unsafe as unsafe world cell. Okay. The method's unsafe. So it's just seems to have been again, they've changed, instead of a reference to a world, it's an unsafe world cell. So it's partly to do with, it's more clear to the user of the code that they have an unsafe reference. Even though it's an immutable reference, there is no guarantee that it's actually not going to mutate. It shouldn't, but that's up to the user. And the reason that Bevy does that is because you end up with that I know these two systems won't touch the same thing, so they can both get immutable references that they turn into mutable ones, because they shouldn't touch the same thing. But you need to make that clear to other people that may be using your plugin code that this does not mean they have exclusive world access. It just means that they've got sectioned off world access. Improve encapsulation of commands and added docs. Okay. The command type remove and remove resource are no longer be considered constructed manually. Okay. So, okay. Okay. But there's just phantom data, so I don't... The command type get or spawn has been removed. It will no longer be possible to use it outside... This type outside of Bevy ECS. Okay. I mean... renamed apply system buffer to apply deferred. Apply system buffers has been renamed to apply deferred. The apply deferred buffer... okay. Rename... Okay. So it's just they've just renamed some stuff. Rename command right to apply. Okay, this was something I think I complained about in my commands video, is that it's just weird terminology. You like write the command. It's like, no, apply the command. You have world access. It's not a text document. Also, they're not just writes. Like, you can literally make a command do anything. A command could run its entire own application internally. It could run like 3 frames and then be done. Like, I don't know why you would. That'd be a ridiculous waste of compute. But they apply. They don't write. They're not. Maybe originally they did just write, but now they are definitely their own independent system that runs. Require read-only queries in PhaestusFox. Okay. Query state parallel. So basically, you cannot parallel iterate with mutable access. Any code mutated the world using the method was unsound. If you need to mutate the world, use parItterMute instead. So apparently, it was just a little bit. I guess you had access to parItter, even if you had mutable world access. But like you weren't using it to mutate. Like if you just parallel iterated but didn't have didn't want mutable access, you could do that. But now it's like, no, you have to use parItterMute, even if you're not actually going to mutate, even if you're just iterating through. Migrate the rest of the engine to unsafe world cell. So basically, it's everywhere that you use a world, you need to use an unsafe world cell. Again, I think this is just to indicate to the user that the worlds aren't immutable references. They're sectioned off sections that we're calling immutable references. You don't actually have complete world access. You may touch something that someone else is trying to edit. So it's an unsafe world cell. Simplify the commands ID for type. Okay, component ID 4. The type component ID now implements a system parameter instead of from world. This means it should be used as a system parameter for system directly instead of being used in a local. Okay, local. Okay, command ID 4. Some of these system parameters I did not know even existed, so really shows how long I've been out of the game. I was going to do a video on system parameters, and I keep discovering more. Make query parItter for each unchecked private. Okay, so basically just removed the unchecked version, so you can't do unsafe shit. Yeah, so if you have a use case, get Bevy to implement it. Don't do it yourself. You should not be touching the unchecked shit, because that's how you let community plugins break shit, because you let the community make stuff with things that they shouldn't be allowed to touch. Deprecate type aliases for fetch. So my fetch. Okay. So basically they're just in query fetch is now world query fetch. So it's just wrapped it internally. implement world query for entity ref. Okay. Entity as opposed. Okay, so it seems to just be flipped. So it's like this one, you go like entity. Used to be you go world.entity with the ID, and now you have an entity ref, and you could get the world back. Now it's you have a world reference, and then you can call entity on the ID. Move app type registry to Bevy ECS. So if you're not using to import, you should update. Okay, so it's instead of being in app, it's now in ECS. Or it's in ECS reflect. So it's just moving things around in crates internally to Bevy. Wow. Man, I don't know why I keep losing the ability to speak. Make sure handling of entities references are robust. Okay. Map entities implementations must change from an entity map parameter to a mutable reference to an entity mapper parameter, and can no longer return a result. Finally, they should switch from calling entity map get to calling get or reserve. So that sounds like the it used to be an entity map where you'd map the entity of the scene to the entity of the real world, you know, in a two-way mapping. And now they're saying, no, you need to make it a mutable object that maps. So inside that object, it probably almost certainly holds a map, but it's a mapper now, so it actually has the functionality to map. And what they're saying is it can't fail, and instead of calling get, should get and reserve. So I guess it would have failed if it couldn't reserve before. Now it's like, no, if the entity doesn't exist, you will reserve it now. Anyway, rename map entity and map specific entities. So I guess in Bevy ACS, map entities and map all entities. So it's just renaming some stuff. Derive event for all events. That's going to be fun. Fixed boxed labels. Oh, I don't know, coal or something. Trait has been refactored to no longer depend on the trait any. Okay. Dynamic equal and dynamic equal hash. Any manual implementation will need to be implemented a new trait manual instead. Okay. Okay. So I don't really know what that's about. Removed on update system set. I don't like that it did this. Like, replaced on update with run if in schedule xxx. Like, I agree, it brings things more in line with system sets, like parameters and stuff, but it also does the inverse of you have on enter and on exit. So on update was the perfect name for it. Now it's like run if in schedule, in state xx, which to me is like not an improvement. Like, that's sort of like a pulling it off to the side because you feel like it's different. Anyway, document query errors. Query entity error. Query does not match. Display message changed from the given entity does not have a request component to the given entity's components do not match the query. Okay, that's just a bit of a grammatical thing there. Name keys like L alt to alt left. Thank you. Been wanting this for ages, but also kind of like, I do like that it's L shift, you know, but shift left, you know, first off, the shift key should not be distinguishable, like, you know, the left shift and the right shift. It should be shift left so that when you queue them up, you can, like, alphabetically, they're in the same place as opposed to all the left keys being next to each other. No, the shift key should be adjacent. Anyway, renamed interaction clicked to interaction pressed. I feel like this is just to bring it more in lines of, if you click a button with your mouse, you clicked it, but if you click a button with your finger, you've pressed it. So it's like, even, like, it's just, it makes sense to say pressed as opposed to clicked, just because clicked specifically refers to like a sharp thing, whereas pressed, you could also say like, you've pressed with this much force on the touch sensing, whereas the clicked is just like a more of a Boolean thing. Obviously pressed is still Boolean, but it makes more sense grammatically to be pressed than to be what I just said, clicked. Don't ignore attribute entities in untyped reflect derived visitor. Okay, I'm not even going to try and decipher that one. With multiple entities. If you were deserializing boxed ref values with mutable entities other than type should remove them, and or deserialization will fail. Okay. So there's the from reflect ergonomic improvements. So you get rid of the from reflect, and you can also implement from reflect yourself, and you can also say don't implement from reflect with the derive, which is really nice. They need this on from world. Please, for the love of God, let from world not be implemented on default. Or somehow do both. Like make from world a derive, not a thing, because it's so annoying that you can't have a from world implementation and a default implementation. I want those two to be different things, but because if it's got default, it automatically implements from world. But this kind of thing, like there was something else that I saw, I don't remember now, but the ability to not have it implement a function so that you can implement it yourself, like you can override it if you want to, is really useful. Reflect stable type paths, implements assets, materials 2D. Now need to derive trait path. Okay, so basically if you add your own assets, materials, or material 2Ds, you need to implement a type path, and we'll now implement get type path method. Okay. Add get as mute and to reflect map trait. Okay, that says just missing functionality. Reflects better proxies. Go watch my full breakdown of the update. Basically, reflected dynamic types now hold more data about what type they are reflecting, which allows you to more accurately compare them and whatnot. So in the future, they will actually be actively comparable and be considered equal. At the moment, they're still only comparing by name, but eventually that'll all change. Construct box reflect from world reflect component. If you were manually creating reflect component fn, you now need to add a from world function pointer. Okay, so that's nice. Component from world. Okay, so instead of directly constructing it, you just point to a standardized type. Added global struct to prepass shaders. So global's shader struct is now available in prepass shaders. So there's just, if you're using a prepass shader, you have access to more information that other shaders also have. So they've also made render graph slots optional for most cases. Okay, you can now get a view entity directly from render graph context while implementing the node. I don't know rendering enough. This is just baffling me. So I think it's saying that you can not make a slot now. Like you don't have to make a render graph slot. You can just sort of tack it on. I'm not sure. Remove unnecessary values vec from dynamic uniform buffer and dynamic storage buffer. The len attribute has been removed because internal changes made it a non-trivial to compute. Okay, if you were to use it and didn't have a workaround, please create an issue. Okay, changed vec2 to rect in camera logic viewpoint. Okay, so basically they're just using more Bevy types. So they had a tuple of vec2s. Instead, they were like, no, this should be a rect, which is basically just a tuple of vec2s. So, a length and a width. So GLSL and Spurvy support is now optional. Okay, change default tone map method. Yeah, I don't know. I like the new tone map, but also I noticed something like on my phone, I liked it a lot more than I do it on my computer, because on my phone, one of the orbs was like purple, and you go over it, it's actually blue now, and I didn't notice anything else really changing. But on my computer, it's really obviously like everything's like the front orbs are dull, the back orbs are shiny. You drag it over, and it's like all the orbs are dull now. Anyway, that's just personal preference, though. They've just changed it by default. Apply code-based changes in proposition for standard material transition. Okay, so it seems like they've tweaked the stuff so that when they add the new assets type standard material, we'll have, I don't know, extra stuff. I'm not quite sure. I'm not going to read that. My brain is not liking that it will change its font and color. Remove component derive from alpha mode. Okay. So alpha mode is no longer a component, so you now have to specify your own alpha mode. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Wait, does that? Man, reading these things, I'm like, man, I could have used that alpha mode thing. I was always wondering why my I couldn't get my shaders to work properly. It's like it's because he specified the alpha mode on an individual component level, so I could make my water additive rather than having to make a specific water shader. Anyway, removed plane struct to half space. Okay, changed of render primitive plane to render primitive half space. Changed a plane member to render primitive. Okay, so they're saying that they've changed the name of planes to half space. Okay. Added render target view. Oh, this is the thing. We'll need to handle the additional field, i.e. match statement. Yeah. So texture view. This allows for VR apparently, but they're just saying they've got an extra option that you can pick. So fun. Consistent screen space coordinates. Window cursor position now returns the position of the cursor relative to the top left instead of the bottom left. Okay. I feel like this is another one of those. Previously in Bevy, they flipped it, and now they've flipped it back. But I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like that's what they've done. This now matches our other screen space coordinates like relative cursor position, UI, and viewpoints. Okay, maybe it's not. Maybe they flipped UI, and now they're flipping the cursor position as well. But the fact that it's from the top left, yeah, it makes sense. The word to viewpoint, the word to methods on cameras now return, take the viewpoint position relative to the top left instead of the bottom left. Okay, so basically, Bevy is more traditional, like it's that way across the screen, as opposed to that way across the screen, I guess, instead of the bottom left. Okay, that's good. If you're using word view, so you basically just need to flip your y-axis, because, yep. Okay, and then they've added web GPU support, so plugin setup has been renamed to plugin cleanup. That doesn't make any sense, but okay. Finished has been added, and plugin additional plugin pipeline should instead of build. Oh, so plugin finish has been added. So is that saying my plugin? Oh, so basically the plugin finish, from what I remember, is you basically Bevy will call build on all its plugins, and then it will call finish. So you can let your plugins insert their resources and set everything up. And then knowing that every single plugin has inserted any resources it would want to insert, you can now go through and, modify things, tweak values based on, because every other plugin's loaded. This is something that you, I guess, really you should only be affecting yourself. But what it's saying is that plugins now, instead of having setup, it's called cleanup, which makes more sense now that I've realized what it's talking about. So originally, in previous versions of Bevy, it would run all of the builds, then it would run all their setups. And so setups, and it says when you hover over setup, like the tip is, this is where you'll do things like remove resources that you only inserted for, say, your dependencies to read while they're initializing themselves. Then you want to remove it. You don't want it to be a resource in the world. You don't want the memory footprint. So, it might be a bunch of configuration stuff that once you've all set up, you delete it all. So they've renamed setup, which happens directly after build, to cleanup. So it's like, hey, build yourself, clean up. And then they've got finished, which is run, I guess, after that. And plugins adding pipelines should do this. Yeah, so finish is run after all the plugins are built. You'll call finish. So maybe we'll clean up on all of them and then finish on all of them, I guess, would be my, the order of operations. And then, so it'll allow you to, do things like insert final parts or check to see if other plugins weren't added because other plugins didn't add them. Okay, so you can take example screenshots in CI. Okay. So, not quite sure how this plays into things, but basically you can take a screenshot. I don't know how that's in the migration guide. Maybe it's because you could have taken screenshots previously, but now they're like, it's actually built in. Compute vertex count for index mesh of GPU mesh. Okay. Built-in skyboxes. Flip environmental light map needs to match how you previously render which backwards. Okay, left-handed Y up cube coordinates while sampling the points. Can we back? Okay, so again, just more stuff. Added morph targets. Mesh now has a simple mesh layout rather than a separate mesh layout. Okay, skinned mesh layout. So it's condensed those two into the same thing. Bevy scenes added scene filters. Ooh, these are fun. So I don't know why this was a thing. So you used to have to pass your dynamic scene a type registry. Actually, this would explain it. So you used to have to pass it a type registry. And so what they've done here is they've yanked the type registry out of the world and then they're passing it to the dynamic scene loader. Now you just pass it the dynamic scene loader. And the main reason for this is that originally, if you didn't want something to make it into the world, like if you didn't want to save certain entities, you would make a custom type registry and then pass that type registry in, and it would pull out only those things that are registered. So this allows you to interact with the type registry without passing it in. Because I was looking at the code earlier because I saw this, and it was one of the few things I had to change on my Bevy Basics repository. And I was going, but surely if you've got access to the world, you can just pull the repository directly out of the registry directly out of the world because you've already got access to it. And that's exactly what it does now. The reason this was separate is so that you could make custom registries and pass them in. And anyway, so you can now deserialize the resources from scenes. So this is great for like saved games as opposed to just segments of levels that you are now loading. Fix lookup variable names. So transform look2 method change default values to try normalize for z and negative z. Okay, I don't. Method change default value of try normalize. Okay. Fixed transform propagation of orphaned entities. If you called sync sample which is now non-exported from Bevy, you need to accept. You need to account for the additional remove component its parent. Okay, so it's saying like they've made it so that you can no longer propagate transforms outside of being Bevy yourself. Only Bevy's allowed to do that. And this means that you need to be more aware of if something had its parent removed and is now orphaned. You need to take that into account. Remove val undefined. Val undefined has been removed. UI behavior will default value should remain the same. Default value of rect field has been changed to pixels 0. Okay, style position field has been removed. Its left, right, top, bottom fields have been added to the style directly. Okay. For the size, margin, border, padding field of style, they undefined should be replaced with pixels 0. Okay. For the minimum size, maximum should be replaced with auto. Okay, so it appears that they're basically saying that undefined, which, if I remember correctly, is actually valid flexbox. Undefined just means whatever. But they're saying like undefined on something that's a physical position should be 0. And undefined on something that, you know, if you don't know what it is, should be default to auto. So, you know, they've removed undefined, I guess, because it was confusing people, and also it did my head in that undefined had funny behavior, like because it's undefined, makes sense it has funny behavior, but it would just do weird shit like not scale the size of things or not move things because they're undefined, and it's like, oh, I'll just be wherever I feel like being because you haven't told me where to be. Anyway, so you know, defaulting 0 makes sense because it's like 0 is like if it's on the left side, it's like because it's defaulted to 0. Change spelling, line break behavior, and line break behavior. So updated where line break behavior is used. Line break behavior updates the event. Hovered file cancelled when we use it. Touch just cancel. Okay, don't know what any of that does. Added CSS grid support to Bevy UI. This is amazing. You can now use Flex and I guess UI system Flex, and UI it's now been called UI system layout, and then because you can get UI system grid, I don't know, I guess that's what it does. Measure func C improvements. Okay, calculated size has been renamed to constant size. Okay. So it's just a bunch of renaming shit. Derived by UI scale when controlling UI coordinates for physical to logical. Okay. Physical UI coordinates are now derived by both the UI scale and the window scale factor to compute the logical sizes and positions of the UI nodes. Okay. This ensures that the UI node size and position values held by the node and the global transform components conform to the same logical coordinate system as the style containing from which they are derived, respective of the current scale factor and UI scale. Okay. I think that's what it's saying, is it's going to basically calculate your world as if it's a certain size and then scale it down to display it on the correct screen based on what you said, rather than what it's doing at the moment, which is just funky stuff. No wrap text feature. I'll explain a little bit better of, I think, what's going on. Is it saying it's going to render your UI at the same size no matter what scale the UI is at or the screen's at for things like coordinates, and then it's only going to scale it to put it physically on the screen. This means that if you have something like, if they click exactly this position, do something, it doesn't matter if they scale the UI, because the way that the click is calculated will always be in the same position. Whereas I think previously that wasn't necessarily the case. If they scaled the UI to half, the values of where they're clicking on the UI would also be halved. So you need to take that in consideration. Now the UI is always pretending to be on like a 10-inch 9/16 screen or something. So no matter where they click, like as a proportion, I think that's what this is saying. Like the physical location and the UI location are no longer considered to be calculated first. They're considered to be calculated second. All right. No wrap text function. So you can now say that text doesn't wrap. So instead of like break line on, you can just say don't wrap at all. Replace the local text query in the text system with a flag stored in a component. Okay, text bundle has a new field, text flag, of type text flags. Okay. Split UI overflow by axes. So, ooh, that's nice. So I think what that's saying is you can now specify if it goes too much over the X, make it invisible, but if it goes too much over the Y, wrap or something. So this means that like things can go off the bottom of the screen, but they can't go off the left and the right. It's like just like a tidiness. Oh, almost done. Text system split. Okay, image bundles now have a field image size and the type UI image size, which contains the same size of the image bundle texture, and it's update automatically by the. Okay, so it's just basically they've taken the UI image size out of the UI image, out of the style struct, I guess, and put it into the image bundle. Updated a hash and hash brown, and move Bevy UI accessibility system to post update. Bevy UI accessibility systems have been moved to post update. If you are scheduling something relative to them, make sure that it's also now in post update. Made it to the end. Then that only took like, I don't know. I'd have to open OBS to find out. Let's find out. What does OBS say? That took an hour. Fuck, that took an hour. That took longer than the update video. Usually that's not the case. Usually the migration guide is quicker than the update video. But anyway, I'm going to do the wrap up for the YouTube video, like a thank you.